This week on Quality Digest Live, we chat with Samir Kadam of Sparta Systems about the key performance indicators of effective quality management.
That and the legacy of philosopher and problem solver Karl Popper. That and more when we come back.
Well, welcome back to Quality Digest Live for May 12th, 2017. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest editor-in-chief, Dirk Ducharme. Have you ever thought about how much electricity has changed our lives? I mean, if you think about it, pretty much any invention you can think of in the last 150 years or so has all been driven by electricity. You know, electric lights, toasters, your refrigerator, computers, of course, the internet. Pretty much everything around us is electrical in some form or another, or was produced using electricity. You just look around the room, I doubt there's anything you can think of, anything that you can see that hasn't been touched by electricity in some way. Well, according to Andrew Ng, co-founder of technology company Corsair, artificial intelligence, or AI as it's called, is poised to do the same thing. AI will change the world, says Ng, in the same way electricity has. And Ng says, you know, just as electricity transformed almost everything 100 years ago, today I actually have a hard time thinking of an industry that I don't think will transform in the next several years, according to Ng. Now, that's a pretty strong statement. But Ng points out that AI is already pretty ubiquitous. I mean, information technology, information of things, web searches, advertising are already powered by AI. It decides whether we're approved for a bank loan. Did you know that? It helps us order a pizza and estimate our wait time for that pizza, and even tells the driver where to deliver it. You might use Apple Siri or Amazon's Echo. More AI. So other areas ripe for AI, says Ng, is financial technology. It's already being used for automatic trading, logistics, healthcare, security, transportation, driverless cars, for instance. But there are a couple of things that are slowing down AI, says Ng. And I might add that slowing down is kind of irrelevant. Slow in technology now is not anything near what slow in technology was, you know, 50 or 60 years ago. So when he says slow, it means like, what, 5 years? So it's kind of a relative term. But those two things that are slowing it down are data scarcity and talent scarcity. So data scarcity. For AI to learn, it needs a lot of data to learn from. The more data, the more experiences a self-driving car encounters, for instance, the faster an AI system can learn. It needs to suck up as much data as it can in order to decide to make decisions. As for talent, AI systems don't create themselves yet, and it still needs talented people. For now. Now this is where Ng, and this is I think really the crux of the article, and this is where Ng touches on something we've talked about a lot. AI and automation has displaced humans. And because of this job displacement, Ng believes that the US should rethink its educational system. And he says something pretty interesting here. We have a slide we'll show up there. Automation in agriculture led the United States to overhaul its education system and develop the K through 12 and university system that we use today, says Ng. And similarly, the US must develop a way to reskill people whose jobs are taken by computer algorithms. I think government should give people a safety net, but pay the unemployed to study, to provide the structure to help the unemployed study so as to increase the odds of gaining skills needed to re-enter the workforce. Now, got to say, Ng has a bit of a dog in the show here. Coursera, his company, delivers online university training. Coursera has 24 million registered users and something like 2,000 online courses. But hey, a few more people couldn't hurt, right? So of course Ng is going to say, hey, it's all about education. But really, I think he is right. And that's an interesting idea that he brings up, paying the unemployed to study, rather than just give them unemployment insurance or welfare or whatever, pay them to study so that you're actually enabling them to go back into this workforce where jobs are being displaced. It's kind of an interesting idea.
I think the piece here that has to be focused on, though, as well, is it's got to be a very directed study. The study's got to be directed by somebody who says, okay, we need these skills, and these very specific skills are going to be filled by a course of 6 months or whatever it may be. And at the end of that, there'll be a job waiting for you. Now, maybe it's a government industry thing, whereas if somebody graduates from the program and industry can use them and hires them, then maybe that industry pays back the government, gets a tax break, who knows, something like that. I mean, that would be a way to get it paid for, provide the skills that the industry needs, and also give people jobs. I mean, that would be a nice way to triangulate that thing. I just thought of that, but I don't know. Maybe that would work.
It's an interesting idea.
I mean, it could, but solutions like this are going to be necessary because, we're going to, I mean, you're going to have disruption. You're going to have millions and millions of people that are not going to have jobs in 10 years that have jobs now through AI. So, I mean, something's got to change. And this is, I mean, hey, yes, he has a dog in the fight, but it's a good dog. I mean, it's a dog that needs to be in the fight.
And I mean, these kind of stories keep coming up from people in technology where there's more and more of an understanding that what they're doing is leading to job loss because of automation and so forth. And so how can they be part of
job creation?
Job creation,
on the other end. Yeah, it does. Good. Thanks, Derek. Okay. Well, sustainability is the topic of our next piece, specifically as it relates to organizational procurement and the creation of a new standard from the International Organization for Standardization. And that's the theme of the article, new ISO 20400 standard. I think it's pronounced 20400. I looked at that a couple of times. I'm like, is it 2400? No, that'd be 2400.
Oh yeah, that's true, yeah.
So I'm like, it's got to be 20,400 when you say that. I think it's 20400. Anyway, new ISO 20400 standard helps organizations integrate sustainability into their procurement processes, which appeared late last month on the blog of ANSI, the American National Standards Institute. And we linked out to the story in Monday's issue of the Quality Digest newsletter. Well, sustainable procurement, or purchasing, if you will, is of course a key activity of many quality-centric public and private organizations. ISO 20400, which has been in development for nearly 4 years, helps provide guidance to these companies as it pertains to their own internal processes and procedures in this area. The ANSI article takes the form of an extended interview with Josh Jacobs of Underwriters Laboratories. Jacobs is an authority on sustainability and LEED, which is the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design certification program. And that helps ensure that buildings are designed, constructed, operated, and maintained with green principles in mind. So LEED's a good program. Jacobs was also one of the architects, if you will, get it? LEED, building, architects? One of the architects, if you will, of ISO 20400. It's a good interview. I encourage you to read it all the way through. And one quote in particular, I think, nicely sums up the intent of this new standard. I'd like to read it to you and show it to you. It's a little lengthy, but maybe we can read it together there. Up until now, Jacob says, there has not been a complete international guidance document on how to integrate sustainable requirements into the procurement function of an organization. The standard is significant because it will serve as a guidance document for both public and private organizations looking to integrate sustainable requirements into their procurement processes. It will show them how to take the external guidance and make internal decisions that fit their company's goals and ideals. And there's a couple of interesting takeaways from that quote there. First, as Jacob mentions, ISO 20400 is really the first standard of its kind. That's important to note. Secondly, it's intended for public and private organizations alike, which is also important. Finally, though, and most important of all, like all good standards, this one is designed to be really flexible enough to allow users to take the external requirements and fit them into their internal processes. And that's important because the one-size-fits-all approach never works. And when you're talking about sustainability, which carries so many shades of meaning for so many organizational stakeholders, both internal and external, that flexibility is really a lot more important. And then that's the idea here, I think, with ISO 20400 is it's very flexible. Right. It's intended to allow organizations to consider what they're doing now with procurement, purchasing, and fit it into what they're doing sustainably. And sustainability is an important thing. Right. Less waste really is a big key of this, making sure that what they're ordering really is usable, real time, kind of, it's almost kind of a lean approach to ordering as well.
And did you say the standard is out or is being
developed? It's out now. Okay. It's out now. It's been in development for 4 years and it's out now.
Okay, well, interesting. All right.
There you go.
You know, in the AI article that I was just talking about a couple of minutes ago, I mentioned that for artificial intelligence to work, it needs a lot of data. That is true also to a certain extent of quality management systems as well. And in order to, let's say, understand a process, whether that's a machine process or a human process or a chemical process, whatever, you need to collect data, you need to look at that data, and you need to make decisions about that process, again, whether it's a human process or you know, some sort of a mechanical process, based on that data. But there's a couple of issues. One, how do you collect that data in a way that is accessible so that it can be looked at and processed? I mean, do you use do you use pencil and paper? Do you use email? Do you use a smartphone app? Do you just yell across the cubicle? Do you stand around the do you stand around the water cooler? How do you collect this information? And then also, what data do you need to collect? And that's the big thing. Okay, well, fortunately, I don't have to answer those questions. That's why we have smart people come on the show. And here to talk a little bit about how to collect data and what data to collect is Samir Kadam, Senior Solutions Consultant for Sparta Systems and co-author of the article, Still Struggling with Quality Metrics. Hi, Samir. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Thank you, Dirk.
Hey,
To you guys today virtually.
There we go. Hey, in your experience, what are the biggest hurdles to companies to collecting data in a way that's useful?
Well, I'd say historically, you implemented a new system to collect data for operational and compliance purposes only. You basically built a system based on known desired output. So for example, for serious events, you just determine what are the regulatory reporting requirements, what is the FDA requiring me to report on, and then you made sure you had a database with the fields that captured these elements. Now, when users wanted to use those same data that was captured for reporting to try to do trending and metrics, it didn't work. They were disappointed. They couldn't get matching results. And I think that's some of the challenges. The system wasn't designed to produce that kind of data. So basically what I mean by that is the data fields may have been lookup fields, or free-form text fields, and attachments. And what you need is lookups and selection drop-downs that you can run all your metrics off of. For non-serious events, the main goal was always to fix the issue quickly and efficiently. The goal was never to influence the product or design or process innovation. And now we look at a much more longer-term approach to that data. Companies have started seeing this challenge and are now designing systems with analytics in mind up front. And that, to me, is such a key component of a good implementation. You got to design the system up front with the desired metrics and process improvements up front in the design process.
So Samir, walk us through this a little bit. How much of this is technical and how much of it is I guess what you could call cultural, like we've always just written it on a clipboard, or we have a meeting once a week and we talk about it. You know, how much of that is cultural issues and how much of it is technical?
Yeah, the technology has always been there. So I'd say it's definitely more of a cultural shift. And in the past, it was a cultural shift to even. I remember working with auditors about 10 years ago that would never give up their paper notebooks. But today, almost everyone we deal with is somewhat familiar with computers. As you know, everyone's using some kind of smart device or smartphone. And I think now more of a modern day cultural shift is about how and why we capture the reporting data. So at first, companies put in quality systems because they were required to do so by the regulatory authorities. Then we saw more of a shift of implementing quality systems as a market differentiator that shows that you're focused on quality. My company has quality as a #1 perspective. Now we're seeing another shift where companies are using metrics and trending to see how they can be more efficient in their business operations. You also want to make sure you identify your major issues before they become costly. And you want to gain the insight and stop the issues from actually making it to the production line. You want to make sure you track these issues much earlier in the process, through the development process, than after a product actually goes into production. So this is definitely a cultural shift.
And before we get into the type of metrics that you might want to collect, let's stay on the data collection here just for a little bit. So I think I heard you say that okay, so maybe people have moved to electronic, maybe not as many people, writing stuff on clipboards and that sort of stuff, or just sending emails. But even all the disparate types of electronic data collection that we're using and data collection, and way of sharing data, there's all these different kind of data silos. I mean, how are those being brought together so that all this electronic data that's out there is easily accessible in one place?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's a good question. You need to start with the output that you want to trend on. You always ask yourself, what questions I'd like to get answered first, that I can't do today, and what would have the biggest impact on my business? And then you track that back to the detailed data points. As you mentioned, multiple sources of where that data is. So you got to make sure you identify those sources and any of the gaps. Part of it is then linking that data and linking those different sources and being able to pull from the same location. So this is the start of your data collection definition. Unfortunately, all data points are rarely in the same system, and you really have to define the process of implementing a traditional system, but keeping analytics in mind as you're designing that. And also keep in mind, you probably won't get it right at the first time. This is an evolving process. You want your system and your data collection process to be flexible and grow with you as you learn more. You want to keep revisiting it every couple of years because you're going to notice that certain metrics that you're capturing are now out of date and certain trends you're following are no longer, as relevant.
Okay, so let's get to the metrics part of it. So let's say you've got the data collection part down, and the data is all being collected, it's easily accessible. So with all this data collection so easy, let's say at that point, isn't it possible people will just collect anything and everything and just vacuum up everything around them and you get tons of data? How do you decide which data to collect so you aren't just inundated with maybe data that just isn't even necessary?
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what our webinar is going to cover. We want to make sure we cover some of the key performance indicators. What is it that you want to get and what is it you want to target? So I'm going to go into some of the global metrics versus some of the site-specific metrics, and then how your company may be doing against other companies in your industry. So we want to show you some of the best practices on producing some of these KPIs.
Okay. So as Samir said there, we are going to have a webinar on this very topic that's going to be key performance indicators and data collection and so forth. It is called the 7 KPIs, Key Performance Indicators, that your QMS should provide. This is a webinar next Tuesday, May 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Samir will be one of the presenters. And Samir, there's another presenter that will be with us as well. Is that right?
That is correct. Mickey Shah, he is the managing director at Process Stream. I've worked with him for many years. We've actually implemented many systems together. He works with us. He's a partner of ours that's done pretty well with implementing systems just like ours.
Okay, perfect. So it'll be Samir and Mickey will be the smart people on the show, and I'll be your host. So if you want to read a little bit more about this and also see a link out to the webinar, just check out the article from Samir and Mickey below the player page there for a registration link, or keep an eye on your email inbox for details on that as well. So Samir, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
All right, and we'll see you next week.
On Tuesday. Thanks, Samir.
All right.
See you.
Thanks. That can be a good webinar there. A lot of you have already signed up for that one, so so step right up, register for it. Again, you can register in Samir and Mickey's article and keep your eye on your email inbox. We'll get an email out to you with a reminder probably early next week. Yep. Alrighty, well, Dirk, one of the endlessly fascinating things for me, it is, and it really is legitimately, about this industry, this great quality industry of ours, is how many different disciplines really go into it. Knowledge systems disciplines. You have engineering, obviously, statistical analysis, metrology, management, psychology, sociology, a lot more. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into managing for quality, and all those things are part and parcel of our great and wonderful industry. And there's another one. Philosophy. Not one that normally you would really think too clearly about, but philosophy's in there too. We actually read an article from Harish Jose in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest that demonstrates the intersection of quality and philosophy, titled Popper's Circle. This piece introduced me to a strategic thinker and problem solver par excellence, the late Karl Popper, who's one of the great philosophers of the 20th century. I'd never heard of Karl Popper. He was an educator, philosopher, did a lot of writing. And in fact, Jose uses as his jumping off point Popper's book, All Life is Problem Solving. I love that title, All Life is Problem Solving, which is actually a collection of Popper's essays on that and many other issues, problem solving primarily among them. Well, the question that Joe's asks via Popper is kind of the chicken and egg, or I don't know, maybe it's more the tree falls in an empty forest kind, which is namely, what comes first, the act of observing a problem that you want to solve or the problem itself? It's kind of an interesting little discussion there and a little perspective. Now, according to Popper, the traditional act of scientific discovery begins with sensory perception, in other words, observation. But Popper rightly asks, well, how can one properly observe a problem when one doesn't know what to look for, right? And in the article, Joe draws the natural comparison between Popper's sense of scientific observation as a cause and effect of problem solving and perception with Taiichi Ohno's famous circle.
The Ohno circle.
The Ohno circle. That's why he named it the Popper circle.
Okay.
Popper circle. I was like, I didn't get that until I read through the article once. Like, oh, I see now. Taiichi Ohno's circle and Karl Popper's circle. Very good. Now, of course, if you're not familiar with it, the Ohno circle is an exercise in which Ohno, who was one of the primary founders and inventors of the Toyota production system, he draws a circle on the factory floor. And as I understand it, this wasn't a real big circle. This was like maybe like a 3-foot circle, right? He draws a circle on the factory floor and you have usually a young Toyota engineer, stand in it for a period of time, like 8 hours. Simply to observe the processes that were going on and then kind of notice and observe any flaws or inefficiencies. So draw the circle on the floor of the factory floor of the assembly line, and this person would just stand and watch and observe what's going on. Now, in one sense, these are two very different perspectives. Popper considers the proper role, again, of observation as a problem in search of confirmation, or even better, what he refers to as falsification, which is key here. That's the process by which one should spend more time disproving a theory than on proving it, which is very much in the scientific method. Okay. Really, you want to the value is in disproving theories rather than proving theories. That's kind of an interesting distinction there. Ohno, on the other hand, comes at it from kind of a purely observational point of view with hopefully no bias or preconceived notions, what we would call beginner's mind. We've covered that on the show before. You go into it and you don't know anything. You just look and you just observe and you take it in and you figure it out later. Joseph's take on it, which I happen to agree with, is that the viewpoints of Popper and Ohno are not nearly as much oppositional as they might first appear. I mean, to improve any complex system, such as the various inputs and outputs that make up a high-tech factory, a lot of inputs and outputs there, one needs to both seek out specific problems and observe with beginner's mind. In other words, you have to go into an observation looking for something in particular that you're seeking to improve, but then you need to have an open mind as to what you're seeing. A certain amount of preconception is probably necessary, but you can't allow that to affect what you're seeing in real time and what the data is telling you too. In other words, you have to combine both those things. You have to really say, okay, we've got an issue, as Popper would indicate. We got an issue, but when you are looking at the issue, don't just look at that issue. If you're going to be there and looking at the process as it's flowing, think about everything, all the inputs and outputs that are going into that with beginner's mind. So it's like the preconception is that we're having an issue, but you're not having a preconception as to what the solution for that issue may be. It's kind of a fine distinction between Popper's approach and Ohno's approach, but I think they can be unified, and I think that Joes would say that too. And in a certain sense, this is kind of a false comparative, and I'm kind of oversimplifying it a lot. But it's really analogous to what Ohno put his engineers through, this idea of the circle on the floor, what Popper was saying and Ohno's agreement. Really, again, Popper's really about the problems and solving them, while Ohno is really about pure observation, which has inherent value in helping people sharpen their powers of perception, which is valuable in and of itself. But again, as with most things, the power isn't in the blacks and the whites, but it's in the grays. I mean, you can blend Popper's considerations of problems first with Ohno's observation for the sake of observation, and that makes a pretty potent quality improvement mindset, I think. And some things, of course, are about root causes and corrective actions, and some things are about learning to see. Understanding which is which and how to best approach your particular situation, I think, is really the art of quality as we could consider it. So learning to see is important, and that's what Ohno is really talking about, but also having a specific idea in mind of what you want to see without it shading what you discover is the art of quality.
So unpack this.
It's a complicated one.
But if you could kind of kind of synopsize the, Popper's idea and Ono's idea again in just a couple sentences? How would you put that?
Popper's idea is the scientific method of you don't want to have to approve anything. You want to disprove things if you can. So you want to falsify things if you can. So you're going to go into an observation with a very specific idea in mind of to what you're expecting and go from there. Ono's is very much of just pure observation. You're sitting in the circle. You're seeing for the sake of seeing, and those two things blended. My idea, I think Joe's idea too. They overlap a little, but having both those ideas in mind, they're kind of different ideas. But if you can hold them in your mind at the same time, go into an observation with the idea that you have an issue that you want to try to solve. But once you're observing it, have beginner's mind and don't be presupposed as to what the answer to that problem may be. I think is it's very hard to do that, but I think that if you look at those two maybe somewhat oppositional things, I think you can bring them together into unity and achieve some good quality.
No, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's a complicated article. Complicated article, short article, only about 800 words, but a lot of information in that one from Hardy Shows. Good piece.
Okay, so it's time for our.
Oh boy, I tried to chew up as much as I could on that one. I left you 4 minutes.
Got 4 minutes.
Okay.
Not too bad on you. So this is the time of our show where we throw questions to each other that we're not expecting. So this may be a little off the wall, but okay. So within the last year or so, we've had Brexit. We've had the election of Donald Trump. And just recently in France, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen, which was not a close election, but the Nationalist Party did get has grown in strength quite a bit in France. So the three things in common with those is that they're kind of nationalist in origin. I think for all of those, big nationalist component going on in all three of those things. Now, and the way I look at nationalism in let's say broader terms is it's all about us. Okay, it's all about bring that focus inward. So in this case, in the case of a country, look at the country, forget about what's going on, very simplified, forget about what's going on outside, concentrate on us. What do we need to do for us? Let's kind of build a hedge around us and focus inward. Very simplified, but I'm simplifying that for a reason. Could you take that same idea, or is that idea, do you think, now migrating into the workplace in terms of management or in the terms of the way companies operate? Is there or has there been a return to a focus inward? Forget about working with our local, environments or, being nice to our suppliers. It's all bottom line, bring it inward. What's important is us, and we're not going to, forget about this touchy-feely partnership kind of stuff going on with everybody outside the company.
Well, it's always been that way. I mean, I think for a for-profit company, it's always been that way because a company is analogous to a living organism. I mean, it does what it needs to do. It eats and grows. It does what it needs to do to survive and grow, especially if you have shareholders. But
do you think the current world environment, which seems to be, we're seeing a lot of nationalism all across the world, do you think that is causing what you're talking about, where it's always been that way in the work, to strengthen, to go more that direction, or are they just kind of two separate things? And they're not really influencing each other?
I think they're fairly separate because they're different ends. I mean, citizens of a nation and employees of an organization are different things. They have different rights, they have different responsibilities. But I think that the way it is impacting it is in the political choices that those governments make. Trump in America is making very distinct choices to say, keep your jobs here. So that would tend to make these companies be more inwardly focused, I think. The problem with that is it's not always what's best for the companies. You look at like a Carrier or Ford or some of these other companies that are at least making steps towards keeping jobs here. They may be sacrificing in the short term some financial benefits of being in Mexico or somewhere else. But they are making the decision that it's better for them in the long term for PR or whatever it may be, to keep, or tax breaks, to keep the jobs here in the United States. But I think companies are always going to do what's best just for them. And their partners, and their close partners in the supply chains. So I think it is kind of a false comparative. I do think that it's different for nations versus corporations. For one thing, corporations are multinational, many of them too. I mean, so they're going to have different ideas depending on what what their company, what their business is, as opposed to where they operate. I think that those are different things. It's a complicated issue. I mean, what's going on, I think, with nationalism now is a wave. and these waves happen. But I think, in my opinion, the general tenor of history is towards more of a globalism. Maybe that makes me a globalist, and Steve Bannon somewhere is watching this and saying, I'm going to get that guy.
I'm going to get that guy.
But I mean, globalism is the trend. I mean, has been the long-term trend for decades, if not centuries now. And I mean, for nations, I think, who are running against that stream are going to eventually be brought back, I think, brought back into line. Companies, I think, have always been after themselves. Like I say, I don't think that there's really it's a fair comparison.
Okay, okay. And actually, that was my whole question. Is that so? In your opinion, what's going on? Let's say politically, within countries is kind of a separate thing. I mean, it may affect taxes.
It's just how it affects that
sort of stuff. But in terms of how a company decides it's going to run itself or manage itself, it's kind of like let those politicians do or have their whatever, and we're going to do things the way we've always.
Again, as you say, with taxes and tariffs and the political stuff that's imposed, regulations or the lack of regulations, the political will that's imposed on those companies from above will change their perspectives. But they're in their DNA. I think they're always going to be in it for themselves because that's just the way it's set up.
What about in terms of? I don't know we're running over here, but one thought that just came to me is what about in terms of hiring practices? I mean, if part of nationalism is, we got to keep, for lack of a better, keep the foreigners out. United States jobs for United States workers. And again, aside from regulations, do you think management and HR people are going to be going, well, yeah, I want Americans first and working for our company. I don't want to hire somebody from Canada.
Well, I mean, I forget the name of it, but the visa program that has been so much in the news right now. H-1A. With these highly educated, workers from outside the United States coming in. That's actually the opposite of that, where these countries are advocating to let us bring these workers in. Again, but it's for themselves. I mean, the companies are in it for themselves. I think the companies will bend to the will of the governments when it benefits them in terms of taxes, avoiding tariffs, avoiding regulations. But they're in it for themselves. Where I think governments have much more complex stakeholders that they need to accommodate. And I think, just my opinion, I think governments also need to accommodate people that are not citizens in a certain way. I mean, I think about myself as a human who's a citizen of the world. I'm an American, but I mean, I think a lot of people think like, well, we should be world citizens, Again, I'm a globalist, right? People are just probably throwing stuff in their computer right now. What is he talking about? But I mean, there's a lot of people who believe that, believe that you need to be a part of the world and you need to be engaged with the world. And it benefits America. We've seen it. I mean, I've studied history enough to know that you look at periods of time where America didn't engage so much in the world, before the First World War, before the Second World War. Those were periods of time where the country wasn't as stable. Didn't have as many people coming in to a certain extent because there was, restrictions on immigrations, especially after the first decade of the 20th century. Anyway, it's complicated issues, but the bottom line is there is I think, a very significant difference between the way governments have to operate and the way that corporations have to operate.
All right.
Okay?
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dirk.
I'll up some time with that
I'll get you next week. All right. Well, thank you, Dirk. Thank you again to Samir Kadam of Sparta Systems for joining us on today's show. Don't forget, Samir and Mickey Shah of Process Stream are going to be joining Dirk right here on a webinar. 7 KPIs your QMS should provide, which is this Tuesday, May 16th. At 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. And again, you can register in Samir and Mickey's article, which is right below the player page, or you can keep an eye on your email inbox for an invite coming on Monday.
There we go.
That's right.
And that is it for today's show. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next Friday.
Have a great weekend.
So long.
Bye.